I'm David Wilcock, and this is Wisdom Teachings. Are we seeing Venus going through a hyperdimensional evolutionary transformation, unlike pretty much anything else we could have expected? Are there telltale signatures in the case of Venus that give us new insights into understanding how these weird geometric patterns that we've observed throughout the universe could impact upon planets? Is Venus becoming brighter? Is Venus gaining more plasma energy? Is Venus even having surface features changing in visible ways just like we saw with Mercury? These are some of the questions that we're going to answer in this week's episode of Wisdom Teachings. I'm going to review for you a little bit of what we did last time because this needs to be put together in one contiguous package. These stunning changes of Venus are consistent with our movement into a more energetic region of our local interstellar medium. NASA finally came clean, even though guys like Dr. Lawrence Sramovsky had said, they have a persistent pernicious bias, they don't want to tell us what's going on in the local interstellar medium. Now that's changed. We know that we're going into a region that has extremely high magnetic energy. It's pushing and warping the heliosphere. It's very, very hot. It's very magnetized. And therefore, the planets are showing this. The sun almost certainly is taking in a lot of that energy and then spitting it out along the equatorial plane in the form of solar particle emissions. And we know this because, as I said, clouds than ever before. They can knock down our power grids. They can create an EMP type of thing. It's very intense. So Venus is experiencing these same sorts of particle interactions, and what we're seeing is that it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. So if you remember from the previous episode, a 2,500% increase in its actual green glow. That's so huge, I'm amazed that more people don't talk about it. Because notice that it only happened in 21 years. That's just unbelievable. And the geometric pattern, as I said last time, is very important here. You can see a perfect triangle could be drawn where that green line goes right up to the North Pole. You could draw another line down to the opposite side at that 19.5 degree latitude, and then a straight line along the bottom, forming a perfect triangle. And that is because there is a tetrahedron in there that this oxygen is emanating from. You don't always see it, as I said, in these other images, it's not visible, but it certainly is on the bottom right. And if this was an isolated effect, it would be one thing, but we keep seeing the geometry showing up in all the different planets with a 19.5 degree angle, and you'll notice that even in the other pictures, about 4 out of 6 here, even maybe 5 out of 6, there is still a very clear large hotspot at the 19.5 degree south point. Look at the left, 19.5 degrees below the equator, on each of these images of Venus, and you'll notice there's so much brightness there that it's actually white surrounded by red. And that's really, there's a red spot on the bottom left, so that's 5 out of 6. That's the 19.5 degree angle. That's a hot spot. There's oxygen coming out of there. So this red. And that's really, there's a red spot on the bottom left, so that's 5 out of 6. That's the 19.5 degree angle. That's a hot spot. There's oxygen coming out of there. So this is definitely showing us the geometry, but it's only on the bottom right where you actually see the line. So that oxygen appears to be what is also eating all of the sulfur that was in the Venusian atmosphere. Thus, we see in only 5 years, this is a NASA study that I go through in great detail in my interplanetary climate change paper with Hoagland. In only 5 years, the sulfur level just plummets. NASA's sending probes past Venus, and what the heck happened to all the sulfur? An atmospheric change that significant is unbelievable, but it is very consistent with the idea that we are moving into some region of our interstellar medium and galaxy that has a lot more particles, a lot more oxygen. And that is just oxidizing all that sulfur, getting rid of it. Remember, sulfur is associated with things that are decaying and rotting, bad smells. And what would happen if you had a sulfurous smell in a room, and then you go and buy an ozone machine, and you shoot that ozone in there? Well, when you smell the ozone, you smell that really kind of refreshing electrical odor. That's O3. Ozone is an extra oxygen over the O2 that it normally has, and that extra oxygen is going around looking for things to grab onto. And what is it going to do? Anything that smells like sulfur, as soon as it grabs onto it, it eats it, and it transforms it, it oxidizes it, breaking the sulfur down. So something happened in only 5 years where a massive amount of the sulfur in Venus's atmosphere got oxidized, just like an ozone machine. But this is the cosmic ozone machine. This is us moving into more ozone in the local interstellar medium, and it's literally just breaking that sulfur down to an incredible degree. So we're seeing this 2,500% increase in brightness in 21 years. Massive sulfur decline in 5 years. Unbelievable. And another one that really is stunning is what we see with the plasma around Venus. Let's take a look. It says here, this is a NASA image, satellite catches Venus by the tail. So notice that we have the sun on the left, not to scale, very out of scale. Then we have Venus with what looks like a windsock coming off of it. There's a measurement of 45 million kilometers below. Then we see the SOHO satellite, that's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, SOHO, and then Earth. So the SOHO satellite is orbiting the Earth. And this is really amazing because the SOHO satellite actually picked up energy from the tail of Venus's plasma, which is not supposed to be there. As of 1978, Venus's plasma tail was measured to have ended not too far from the planet itself, but SOHO in 1997 actually caught some of the tail in its actual detection systems. It crashed right in. So just so you know, I'm not making this up, and you can go to my old papers, go to my book, you can research all these footnotes for yourself. This came from Dr. Marcia Neugebauer, who's from NASA JPL, on their SOHO website. The original measurement of the plasma tail was only 70,000 kilometers long, and then they noticed that it had changed to 45 million kilometers. And I'm the one that actually said, well, what the heck is that in percentage? And calculated it's 60,000 up so much. That hyperdimensional tetrahedron inside is charging up so much, releasing those oxygen atoms along that geometric plane, as I showed you, that it is just shooting out all this charged oxygen, all this ozone, plasma. Because remember, plasma is what makes ozone. If you look inside that ozone machine, you see the lightning, and it's got that bright light, bluish white light. That's the plasma, and you need the plasma to create ozone. Anytime you have plasma, you have ozone. So a plasma tail is an activated oxygen tail. Where did all this come from? It's very clear that this is one of the most dramatic examples of seeing how much the planets are really changing, because it didn't even take very long. In this case, we're talking about 1978 to 1997, less than 20 years, only 19 years, and this whole thing happens. Remember, it was only 5 years for so much of the sulfur in Venus's atmosphere to oxidize. And we're seeing all of this stuff happening. But there's still more going on with Venus than that. In 2006, they discovered through NASA that there are these weird dark vortexes that showed up at the poles of Venus. They were not visible before. This is very important. They say unexpected detail in the first ever Venus South Pole images. Well, maybe they were something they hadn't seen before, because it does say they've never imaged it directly from the South Pole. But what they found here was this very strange dark spot, as you're going to see here in this excerpt. ESA, that's the European Space Agency, ESA's Venus Express has returned the first ever images of the hothouse planet's South Pole, showing surprisingly clear structures and unexpected detail. Scientists are especially, which was previously suspected but until now unconfirmed structure that corresponds to a similar dark cloud structure over the North Pole. Now, why is this so important? This is important because we're dealing with the exact geometric North and South Pole, and there is a vortex there that is dark. The geometric position. And that also suggests, this is where I'm going with this, that the actual geometric patterns I've been talking about, like the tetrahedron, are exerting force on those polar regions. And in the previous episodes, when I showed you geometry in our solar system, we did see polar geometry. We saw X-rays shooting right out from the geometric north of Jupiter. And they say, well, how could there be this X-ray emission from the actual rotational north? It doesn't make sense, but it does, again, when we're dealing with geometry. The new model is these geometric fields are all important, and therefore these dark vortexes are visible signatures of how that geometry, with its center exactly at the North and South Pole, is swirling those clouds and making a dark spot. But that's not all. There's some really, really cool stuff in the hyperdimensional arena. When we go to 2012, we see an unexpected and dramatic shift in the surface features of Venus. That's right, they're actually moving around. Take a look. This is February 10th, 2012, unexpected Venus motion shift on space.com. And this is the link where you can find it right here. Measuring a change in the so-called morning star's spin. And it says right there, you can read it, peering through the heavy cloud cover with infrared instruments, it is found that surface features have shifted by up to 12 miles. Holy smokes. So it's moving. They're actually moving around. And this totally defies the logic of the mainstream model, which would suggest that a mountain is going to sit still, obviously, right? We don't think of mountains on Earth moving. You don't think of a mountain where, like, the crust on the surface is buckling as something underneath it is pushing it along, so that areas that were once flat, as the mountain moves 12 miles, now that area, if your house was on there, now you have a mountaintop view, whereas before your house was on flat ground. But we're literally talking about mountains where the topology of the surface moves and the location of the bump of the mountain changes. Well, that again suggests that there is some geometry inside Venus that is pushing up the crust, and as the geometry itself moves, maybe because Venus has a more malleable surface than Earth, the mountains actually move in their location. And that fits very well with what we saw with Mercury, where they said Mercury is shrinking. And you have craters where things have hit the surface, but then there's this scarp that forms over the crater and folds the crater. Well, the crater can't be that old, and yet these scarps are new, and then they find that there's 3 times more of them than they expected there to be, just from the earlier observations in 1975 with Mariner 10. What the heck is going on here? It's as if Mercury is shrinking, and I said, remember, it could be that the sun is pulling energy out of Mercury and thus causing its plasma core to decrease in size a little bit, pulling some energy out. Well, now Venus is having these weird structural changes too. But I've saved the best for last. The plasma core to decrease in size a little bit, pulling some energy out. Well, now Venus is having these weird structural changes too. But I've saved the best for last. The best is this very, very strange hyperdimensional gravity wave that they've located on Venus. This may be one of the best things we will ever find to help the hyperdimensional model along. And it comes from this announcement by Andrew Coates, January 17th, 2017. Astronomers spot a strange bow-like structure in Venus's atmosphere. And here's the link to that. It's from phys.org. So once again, what we're seeing is weird stuff that's geometric that doesn't line up with the mainstream model. Look at the line in the atmosphere. Notice that there is a geometry to it. It isn't exactly tetrahedral, but it's a little bit strange. Venus is doing something here. There's this weird straight line appearing in its atmosphere that doesn't seem like it belongs, but it forms up pretty nicely with the tetrahedron. Because remember, the tetrahedron also can create a vertical longitude line where it goes right along the side of the planet up to the North Pole. It doesn't have to be curved. It can be straight. This one has a little bit of a curve on it, but it's really only once we get in and read the article that we see exactly what's going on here. Now this is where it gets so exciting to me, because they're looking at a mountain on Venus, and you notice that what's happening here, as we're going to see them describe it, is that there is a change in gravity. So gravity normally does not swirl around, but what we're seeing around this mountain is that there is actually a weird gravitational disturbance in the air above the mountain. So look over here, on the left-hand axis, and you'll notice it says altitude in kilometers, and it goes all the way up to 70 kilometers above the surface, that they have these weird spiraling coils. Now look, in the conventional scientific view, there's not supposed to be any gravitational activity going on over a mountain. A mountain should not be causing a swirl in gravity above itself. Conventional physics would say gravity just goes down, and it's going to go down the same way. Conventional physics doesn't have any allowances for spin in gravity except for the Coriolis effect, which is what bends a cannonball as you fire one, and it bends through the atmosphere. Okay, but wait a minute. What I've been saying, if you go back to those hyperdimensional planet episodes, is that the great red spot on Jupiter, the great dark spot on Neptune, those are atmospheric cyclones. And I'm saying gravity is what's pushing the cyclones into that pattern, right? Gravity is causing the swirl. And you remember, what did I say? Mars has Olympus Mons, a mountain 3 times the height of Mount Everest. A very massive mountain that's exactly at 19.5. Earth has Hawaii at the 19.5 degree latitude. And that, once again, is this massive volcanic formation. So what I've been saying to you is that there is a gravitational wave that is swirling the magma around inside the Earth's mantle, or inside any mantle of any planet. And there's a mantle current going on. There's a lava current caused by the gravity, and that current, it's spinning into one area and it pushes it up, because that's where it's like a whirl. We have actual gravitational spinning in the atmosphere. This was so exciting to me because I've had this model out there, which again, science is about prediction. Part of my predictive model was that we would see a gravitational spin wave around the mountain that would be detectable. NASA found it. Totally pays off the model. So let's take a look at this excerpt and dig in deeper. Enter the Japanese spacecraft Akatsuki, which was launched on May 20th, 2010. The spacecraft is designed to study the structure and the activity of the Venus atmosphere. A bow-shaped wave was caught by Akatsuki's imaging instruments looking in the infrared and ultraviolet parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, and I showed you that wave already. The astronomers analyzing the data noted that this weird wave structure extended 10,000 kilometers through Venus's cloud tops and persisted for a few days and then suddenly disappeared. A weird intermittent cloud formation that goes up by 10,000 kilometers. What could cause that? Well, they're on the right track because they say it's gravity. Remarkably, the shape seems tied to the slowly rotating terrain below. The land below is rotating, and that's where the shape comes from. Particularly a high region called Aphrodite Terra, which is up to 5 kilometers high and the size of Africa near the equator. So did you catch that? Anything that's 5 kilometers high is going to be one of the biggest mountains on that planet. 5 kilometers is well over 2 miles high. So don't think about this as anything minor. We're talking about a massive mountain, and it's those kinds of mountains that seem to be pushed by the geometry. So then, a massive mountain, and it's those kinds of mountains that seem to be pushed by the geometry. So then, this gravitational disturbance is actually making the mountain move, the surface features of Venus moving around, as I said, but it's swirling the clouds and creating this weird bow-shaped pattern 10,000 kilometers above the surface. The structure persists, this structure of the shape of the gravity and the shape in the mountain that's being pushed by the gravity, this structure persists in the rapidly moving, super rotating winds at the cloud level. So there it's telling you that these winds are rotating at a super speed. It's causing an atmospheric vortex, and there's similar motion occurring around the volcano / mountain itself, the 5-kilometer tall mountain. You can see how big it is right there by looking at the side. So this is a wonderful validation of the model. This cloud formation is a bit like the flow of water as it flows around a submerged stone in a stream, just like a whirlpool, as I've been saying. The researchers suggest that a stationary gravity wave, which is different from a gravitational wave, in the atmosphere might cause the effect. Well, my God, that's exactly what I've been saying this whole time. So you can imagine how exciting this is when you have a predictive model, you've put the data together. I kind of had a cheat sheet because extraterrestrials sometimes talk to me in my dreams and speak to me in little subtle voices when I'm waking up in the morning. David, you really ought to look at this, and I've had so many dreams that led me to understand this geometric physics. I wouldn't have got this on my own. Law of One, which I began reading in 1996, talks about this, and for a long time I struggled to decipher how these geometric patterns that I learned about back in '90, a huge, huge mountain that's also in motion. And it's a stationary gravity wave, as they say right here. Although smaller scale gravity waves have been seen near to ground level on Venus before, the scale of this new gravitational feature seems to be extremely large, probably the largest in the entire solar system. In fact, it is unclear whether it is even possible for a gravity wave to cause such a big effect. In other words, what they're admitting there is their models do not allow them to explain this much push against the atmosphere with gravity. But look, you have to deal with what we already see. What else could it be but gravity? They've got the mountain is doing weird movements, there's this super rotating atmospheric vortex, goes up 10,000 kilometers. You have to rule out everything else, just like I did years ago, and conclude, Richard C. Hoagland was always talking about hyperdimensional energy, hyperdimensional, and I said, well, yeah, it might be coming from a hyperdimensional place, and I honor him for that, and it's got to be doing something that pushes on matter. And what pushes on matter? Gravity. There's got to be some physical gravitational force that's causing the great red spot to spin, that's causing the great dark spot to spin, that's causing these cloud bands, that's causing these massive volcanic mountains on Earth, Mars. Venus now looks like has the same thing. Solid planets get mountains, gas planets get vortexes in the atmosphere. Venus is now showing us both of those things. And it's also very likely that this same area where the mountain is where that green oxygenated gas is coming out from that we saw in the previous picture from the night side. I would imagine that all of these are connected, and we are seeing the corner of the same area where the mountain is where that green oxygenated gas is coming out from that we saw in the previous picture from the night side. I would imagine that all of these are connected, and we are seeing the corner of this tetrahedron activating itself. The discovery illustrates that although we can explain some of the features of the thick, fast Venus atmosphere, it appears that low-altitude atmospheric dynamics are not fully understood yet. Well, that's putting it mildly. But we are slowly uncovering the planet's secrets, and the latest study is certainly making waves. Bad pun. So, this is really, really great stuff, because Venus is now our smoking gun. We have a mountain that is doing its thing. It may be the same area where all that oxygenated gas is coming out from, the 19.5 degree point. Venus is charging up. It's becoming 2,500% brighter. 60,000% increase in the length of its tail, sulfur gas being destroyed in only 5 years, and we're getting a weird 10,000 kilometer tall vortex formation in the atmosphere that actually shows gravity swirling around. And all they would have to do is apply that same logic that they got with this Japanese space probe, something they've already seen, and say, well, why couldn't this be what's explaining the Great Red Spot? Why couldn't this explain the Great Dark Spot? Why couldn't there be currents in the mantle? Some NASA studies actually have talked about the idea of mantle flow currents, and it would have to be. The mantle itself is a liquid material, and when the Earth is rotating, that liquid is going to be in flux. It's going to be moving around. So what we're seeing here is that there is a compelling singular explanation. The same gravitational forces that are holding those super galaxies together in a big matrix, the same gravitational forces bending the arms of galaxies along angular lines with straight lines in between, are now getting inside planets, and they're actually doing these things that lead to measurable gravitational spin in the atmosphere. And it's all part of this overall hyperdimensional change that is occurring in Venus and throughout our entire solar system. Now, if you remember in science class, there was My Very Elegant Mother, something like that, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and then it goes on from there. And there were various acronyms that people used to try to remember the order of the planets. So in the conventional view of how you would delineate the planets from the sun going out, you start with Mercury, then you have Venus, then you have Earth. But Earth has so many specifics that I'm actually going to skip over it, and we're going to go next to Mars, because Earth, obviously, we can measure a lot more because we live here. We can look at volcanic activity, which is not caused by global warming, earthquakes not caused by global warming, external atmospheric changes, brightness changes on Earth. All the stuff we want to see is going to be on Earth. That's coming up down the road. So next time, we're going to go into the mysteries of Mars. And you will not be disappointed, because all of the things that we're looking for are going to come out left and right. That's coming up next time here on Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, bringing you the information you need that will set you free. Thanks for watching.